of all, thank you. Yes, thank you for recording us. And first of all, we have today an introduction of our academic program. So with this in mind, let me give a floor to our academic director, the founder and the creator of our academic program, professor of Alexander Gumboldt University in Berlin, Ilya Kalinin. Ilya Kalinin, please go ahead with our introduction.
Thank you, Igor. I'm glad to see all of you in the audience. So today I will have two roles. The first one is the role of just a moderator, so it's a technical function of our today meeting, and in the same time I will introduce my own course, which I hope I will teach among others. Yeah. But don't I mistake that, Igor, you also will say some general words as a main organizer.
Even more general that I have already said.
Yeah. And
the school well, I don't have a lot to say. First of all, I'm happy to see you all. I mean, our preps, our professors, our guests, our students, hopefully. So we have a very long way before we will start with our program, with our school. What is important, what I expect from our meeting, maybe besides the introducing of programs, introducing of our courses, our dear guests will ask us questions and to share with us with their expectation what they do expect from our school. It would be very helpful for us because we're all just ready to start and we need to take into account everything which our students and our guests are waiting from us. So I also have in mind, even hope, maybe to have at least one more meeting with more details about our bit, how we will arrange things, not only for education but only for entertainment, for way of life. What should be our conditions of living in here in Tallinn? But I think that for today, the main thing for us and the main thing for our guests is to introduce our courses. So again, I have a pleasure to give a floor to you, Ilya. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again, Igor. So, as I hope everybody is able to see on our website, our school has two dimensions. Yeah, the first and the key one is the Russian language program, and the second advanced part, the academic part of the program, is a series of different courses, which there are distinct between traditionally literary scholar courses and courses dedicated to political science or sociology or cultural theory. So we will start from the language program. So I will invite Olga Roginskaya, who is the chair of our language program. Please, Olga. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I am Olga Roginskaya, and I'm glad to represent you, our Russian language course. We have 120 hours. We have 6 weeks of our work of learning Russian, and we have 4 hours a day. And every day you have 2 hours of 2 different courses. So, and our courses are quite traditional. They are phonetics and Russian intonation and listening. It is the first level of learning Russian. The second level is grammar, of course. The third level is reading and vocabulary and discussion. And the last level is talking. Talking and discussion, yes. Certainly talking, discussion, it is always between, yes. Phonetics and intonation, grammar, talking, new words, vocabulary, yeah, and listening, because every discussion is a kind of dialogue. Well, and I want, I can say, I dream that you'll appreciate the main principles of our program. So the guiding principles of teaching Russian at our school are, first of all, the combination of a linguistic and a cultural historical approach to language learning. And this mix of linguistic and cultural historical approaches is very important for me. And I think we cannot divide one from the other. The second principle is an emphasis on the formation of linguistic intuition and analytical skills among students. So learning any language means feel this language, means that you can make the correct or maybe the interesting choice of word or a phrase or an intonation and so on. And the third principle is an awareness of the stylistic and ideological components of the studied linguistic constructions and scenarios. I think it's the problem of understanding not only the main meanings, main topics, but different shades of the meanings is very, very important, especially in contemporary political, social, and cultural today, yes, situation. For graduate students, we hope that we will have a lot of graduate and postgraduate students. For them, we would like to give some additional skills. So if they work on their thesis and dissertations, we offer specialized study of academic Russian and personal consultations on writing texts and presenting research in Russian. One quite important methodological principle of teaching Russian at our school is that the texts for reading and discussion are intended to correspond to the texts which will be discussed by our lectures. lecturers, yes, dedicated to to Russian culture, history, and politics. Ilya and other guests will speak about them in details further. So our students will be able to gain a feel for the original language while also enriching their vocabulary. The phonetics and listening course will involve not only work with the reception and the comprehension of spoken speech, but also the different international constructions in Russian and their respective discursive situational content. To this effect, the course will feature work with Russophone news, television and internet resources, and I think interview shows from TV and YouTube, because it's very, very live, very, very modern, urgent Russian language. So I think so. We have the detailed program of teaching language on different levels from A1, so it is the beginner's level, to C1 or maybe even C2. It depends on our students and their level in Russian. There will be small groups. We hope there will be groups of 3-5 students. And there are 3 or 4 teachers, Russian teachers. So our students can speak, can listen to different Russian languages. Yes, it's very important, I think. And so different ways of speaking Russian, to being among different Russians. It is, I think, the very important point describing the future atmosphere at our school. So I would like to answer the questions, and I think so in general, that's all.
Svetlana, as well as I see you, you already have a question, yeah?
Yes, I have a question. Actually, I have a very general question, not specifically about like Russian program, but I talked to our language coordinator, and essentially the main, I wouldn't call this obstacle, but the main question is how our students could get a credit, because that's a problem. I think any program that they enroll, they would enroll if they could get a Brown credit. But to get a Brown credit, they could do it only either through some other college that has some kind of like established relationship with your program, or the program should be authorized by Brown. So in other words, I don't know how you how do you handle this?
Well, I think
Ilya, if I may, to answer this question, right? Because it's question more to me, the director, and the question to you, Olga, the teacher, and even the chair of the program. Svetlana, we're working on this. We certainly understand that this is a big program. This is a problem. Even you're right, it could be taken as a kind of obstacle. We working on solving this problem, but I would say that the easiest way to solve this problem is to receive the description. So if the chair of your language program, of your Russian program in Brown, has some terms, some conditions, right? Some specifically formulated expectation, what, let's say, she needs to know about our program in order to be ready to send her students to our program. It would be the best, but I think I understand that probably it's not enough. So we're on the way of solving. We have I wouldn't say negotiations, I would say conversations with some language programs in the United States in order to maybe to receive to have some instruction for them in order to make our program more attractive. But if you mean the strict affiliation with some institution, right? If I understand you correctly, this is what you mean, right?
Yeah, my understanding is that like the way Brown works, there are certain approved programs by the university. And if our students go to these programs, then they get Brown credit for that. Without getting Brown credit, students are less likely to go because they will incur expense, but they won't get any credit. So that's a problem.
Yeah, about the credits, this is clear. About expenses, we're also working on opportunity for students to receive some fellowships for our program. This is our goal, which we close to solve. It's easy for us. But again, the problem of affiliation, the problem of improvement of our problem is clear to me as well. And I will keep you informed how we're going ahead with solving this problem.
I will ask our language coordinator because I don't know much about it myself. I don't work with those programs, but I will ask our language coordinator probably to write to you so that
I would appreciate so much if you do it. Thank you.
Okay.
It would be a great help to us. We will do everything according with you. And
so maybe she knows something and she could give you some tips about how to proceed and what to do.
absolutely, she knows much more. At least me do. Thank you. And by the way, Svetlana suggested to our guest to write questions, to add questions to our chat. So if somebody has questions, please go ahead and add them to our chat. We will see them and trying to. Yasha has a question. Okay.
All right, I was going to type it, but I can just as well ask. Olga, thank you. And maybe it's also a question for Igor as well. Given sort of the demographics of the college I work at, CUNY and Hunter, imagine there are several students who are so-called heritage speakers of Russian. Would you consider having them heritage speakers as a separate group? Which probably means adding like yet another different class to the program, which might be difficult, but perhaps not impossible. So it would be helpful to hear if you are anticipating something like this. Not just like true beginners or intermediate or advanced learners, but students who, for instance, fluently speak but do not read. And of course, it varies greatly between them. Thank you.
So my short answer is yes, of course. I think that probably it's kind of challenge, right, to have this kind of students as far they have some knowledge of Russian, and even better than the majority of students we're going to have. But still, as far as we announcing an individual approach, that's what we have in mind to work in person with all of our students, not only in heritage. So I think in this case, certainly, we also will work with them personally, and will first of all, the level, even encourage the level of language and knowledge of Russian is not the same, right? So despite that they inherit it, it doesn't mean that they all have Russian at the same level of quality. So yes, and closer to, as far as we get closer to our school, as far as we get acquainted with people, with students, certainly we can create a personal program for each of them. Well, maybe we'll need to create some special forms of teaching for them, right? Probably closer to their native speakers. As we mentioned in our program, Tallinn is interesting from this perspective. There is a lot of Russian-speaking people, a lot of institutions like theaters, performance, and so on. So maybe we need to make the program for them. I mean, encourage students in some particular way. But still, certainly we will do this program for them.
Okay, thank you.
This is my answer.
Yes, I think we'll begin with detailed consultations, detailed conversations with every student, and we'll decide how we will divide them into groups, because yes, so the traditional methods of defining the level of speaking any language is not enough for us. Yes, and I think their interest, their academic interest, their specializations are very important here too. And I think all our language teachers will be at the same time the tutors, or they will decide, yes, and imagine and invent the individual way, of learning Russian for every student. And I think the program of our school and the our school daily routine will give us this chance to prepare some aesthetic and individual every student, I hope.
Yeah, and maybe I would add that since our school has a very rich and diverse academic program, yeah, this advanced academic program, maybe the main benefit for heritage speakers will be precisely academic courses we offer for them. So these students, maybe they will be able to choose less Russian language courses, but more elective courses from our academic program. Yeah, so this is also the option for this kind of students, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, maybe we will follow to the next step of our today program. And indeed, if somebody has question, you may ask them into our chat. So now we will have a series of short introduction of the courses we offer, and the first one who will introduce his course will be Kevin Platt. Kevin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilya. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, just 3-4 minutes, not more. Yep.
I'll be quick. And I'm very excited for this program. I love Tallinn. I'm always looking for excuses to visit. So my course is going to be composed of 3 lectures, but in the interest of making this a course which is actually going to be engaging and interactive, I think that there's going to be some seminar and discussion component as well. It'll be a course about literature. I'm a literary scholar, even though my attention has wandered over the years away from literature, and it's going to be about literature between the very late Soviet period and the contemporary moment, focusing and organizing the material around questions of space and spatiality. One of the most influential works dedicated to the cultural life and social life of the late Soviet period, I'm sure everyone here knows it, but for students who tune in to think about this, the opportunities of this summer school, I'll explain it. It's Alexei Yurchak's book, Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. And one of his primary metaphors and also technical terms for what happened to Soviet social discourse of all kinds at the end of the Soviet Union was deterritorialization. Deterritorialization is a very complicated theory term derived from work by Deleuze. But we can think about it in, and we'll talk about it in my courses, we can think about it in, I think, somewhat simplifying terms. It's about the process whereby language loses touch with the structures of everyday experience, which is how Yurchak explains what happens to Soviet social life as a whole, that the structures, the institutions, the official language all began to float up from the ground and lose meaning, or gain meanings which were unexpected for it, as the Marxist-Leninist project that undergirded the Soviet Union began to seem vacuous and unfulfillable to most Soviet people, or at least highly removed from any kind of lived reality. Another way that we can think about what happened to culture in the late Soviet period, and literature in particular, is a much more common metaphor, and that is the metaphor of the underground, which is commonly applied to the cultural space of non-official, non-conformist cultural activity in the late Soviet period, things that were not published in the Soviet official press, official publications, but were produced by informal circles of friends, disseminated through samizdat or through informal production of text. So stepping from the Soviet period to the post-Soviet period, one of the peculiar and interesting things that happened is that the mainstream of Russian literature of the 1990s and onwards emerges not from Soviet institutions, from Soviet official writers, but by and large from the underground, from the deterritorialized, unofficial, nonconformist literature of the Soviet period. It's especially noticeable if we think about poetry, for instance. It's very hard to put your finger on an official Soviet poet who continued to be an important Soviet in the 1990s. There are a few examples. Think of people who are on the margins of officialdom. In and out of it. Kublanovsky comes to mind once in a while, although he also emigrated before returning to the Soviet, to the post-Soviet space. But the most important figures of the post-Soviet period were people who emerged from the underground. And one could think about what happened to them as a territorialization of unofficial literature. This literature which had been floating in space in the interstices of Soviet life suddenly enters into the mainstream. Dmitry Prigov, possibly the most omnipresent, in his own words, figure of the 1990s poetry scene in the Russian Federation, was also one of the most common cultural figures to appear on television in the 1990s in the Russian Federation. So this is like the most official and central territorialized form of cultural emplacement in territory. So that's one thing we're going to be thinking about. And if we'll follow the story up until the present, one of the strange, sad, ironic paradoxes of our present moment is that the cycle of Russian cultural life that is just completed has involved the return of the circles of poetic production, of literary production, that were created out of this surge of vitality and creativity in the 1990s that, you know, erupted from this late Soviet underground. The people that I know, the poets that I know, the second generation, the third generation of poets, who all can be traced in some kind of a genealogy to those poets of the 1990s that emerged from the Soviet underground, have either all left the Russian Federation in the wake of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Some of them have stayed within the Russian Federation, but they can no longer publish because of the new censorious regime of public life in the Russian Federation. Many of the publication venues which they depended on, we can think of things like Kolta, are no longer even available to them. But many more have left the Russian Federation and are now operating only outside of the Russian Federation. So this is one way we're going to be thinking about space and spatialities in terms of deterritorialization, territorialization, and exterritorialization, we could say, or re-deterritorialization of what I, presume to be the mainstream of Russian literary production over the past 30 years. Although we should also be sensitive to the fact that we don't want to, repeat history, which is repeating itself. I'm certain that the, white Russian emigres of the 1920s were convinced that the mainstream of Russian literature was theirs, that had left the Soviet Union following the revolution. So we probably shouldn't discount what's going on in the Russian Federation in publishable literature now. And there is a lot of discussion about Z poetry, and we will actually discuss Z literature as well in this course. Yet the other part of the problem that I want to investigate in my course is the problem of borders. In this area, we can think, and I'll try to be quick. I know I'm running over time, aren't I, Ilya? At the end of the Soviet era, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the breakup of Soviet space into all of the component Soviet republics, Russian literature and Russian literary and linguistic space was also broken up across the post-Soviet republics. Tallinn is a good place to think about this, as is neighboring Latvia, places with very significant populations of Russian speakers and also Russian writers who have been and continue to produce Russian literature. I just finished writing a book about Russian culture in post-Soviet Latvia, focused in one chapter on the operations of the Arbita group of Russian multimedia artists and poets. And we'll probably spend some time discussing them. The sort of main line of inquiry in thinking about this, the operations of Russian poets, literary figures, or Russian-speaking poets and literary figures outside of the Russian Federation concerns the significance of the border. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell apart, we did imagine, many of us at least, that the world was going to be structured as a flat space of like-minded, democratic, free market societies, in which the presence or absence of minorities, ethnic minorities in one place or another didn't mean that much. And for a while, if we think about the lives of Russians and Russian speakers in Latvia or Estonia, the border was significant, of course, yet it was easy to move back and forth across it. And there was a fair degree of sorting and imaginary work to figure out what the relationship was between poetry written in Riga and poetry written in Moscow, for instance, during the 1990s and 2000s. We could think about the space of Russian cultural production in a place like Riga as an extraterritorial location. We could also think about it as a border zone, a zone in which Russian culture or Russian cultures, if we think about them in the plural as a bag of different kinds of cultural practices and beings, extended beyond the territorial dimension of Russian political space, demarcated by the borders of the Russian Federation. But what's happened in the last 2 years, really in the last 8 years, is that border zone has been turning into border line again, where cultural producers are placed into a position of not being able to be both and neither in terms of their belonging to different kinds of cultural practices and spaces, yet are being placed into a position of making choices about being on one side or the other of a border. And we're going to discuss. Yeah, I'll finish with that. We're going to study that process as well, the transformation of border zone into border line. And I'll stop. Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you so much for such a detailed introduction into your course. Yeah, thank you, my friend. And but I I asked to all our colleagues to be shorter, yeah, in their introduction. And today we have two Artemis, but the first one will be Artemy Magun, yeah, with his introduction. Please, Artemy.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my class will actually be, in a way, sequel of Kevin's. So they nicely fit together because I will also be speaking of the late Soviet and post-Soviet period. We will even also read some Russian literature, but my objective in this course is mostly historical. I will act uncharacteristically as a historian of events and cultural facts. With the main storyline that is a non-linear storyline. Because we are now living at the time of this great geopolitical confrontation, and Russia is this absolute villain of the world system. It is very easy to think that it had always been the case, and that there is something essential in Russia's role as a villain, and that's why in my course I will try to present the trajectory from the late 80s to now, showing that the current events are not the result of, again, some repressive and imperialist nature of Soviet Union or Russian Federation, but rather of the effort to emancipate oneself from this repressive imperialism. The capitalist reforms, the destruction of infrastructure, the so-called globalization and similar processes were precisely what actually generated the Putinist Russia. And there were several steps on on this path. The most important being this kind of conservative twist in the socialist and then the liberal ideology that happened in the 90s and zeros. And then the other is, of course, the geopolitical imperial imagination that we are going also to explore with some Russian fiction writers. So it's all about this twist. Yeah, but it's, again, we will just briefly discuss this history. I assume that most of my students will be people who don't actually remember this in live. So it will be this kind of interesting exercise in the recent history, between the memory and history, somewhere in this kind of gray zone. That's it.
Thank you, Artemy. And the next introduction is mine, and my own course will be dedicated to different political dimensions of contemporary Russian culture. So the first part of the title of my course is Cultural Politics. It's much more familiar and conventional topic or object for cultural analytic, and the second one is about culture as politics. So this part maybe a bit more unexpected, and that's why interesting. And the purpose of my course is to describe the mechanisms and practices of the mutual intersection or interpenetration between culture and politics in Russia during recent decades. And I think that in a situation of shifting economic, social, and ideological coordinates, and the institution of the absence of clear image of the future, or the absence of the modernization strategy, culture, I mean culture is which understood as a common national heritage, historical memory, some normative national tradition. So culture in this sense began to function as a horizon, as a value horizon that justifies both the domestic and foreign policies in contemporary Russia. And this is the case that we can find in during Putin's period. And in a certain way, codified and normalized Russian culture began to be instrumentally used or utilized as the basis for both for the political identification of the society and for the symbolic legitimation of the existing political regime. And moreover, elements of cultural identity connecting the independent states of the post-Soviet space began to be used as a justification for territorial claims and changes in political borders. And the problem is that the boundaries of a political community, which based on a cultural identity, almost inevitably do not coincide with the boundaries of the state. Yeah, and for example, Kevin had already talked about this tension. And thanks to these substitutions and conceptual shifts, Russian culture within the official discourse of patriotic hegemony turns into sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious euphemism for the Russian Empire. And this course will focus on the cultural wars and cultural advances that permit the political fabric of modern Russia and its relations with other states. Analysis of the logic and rhetoric of political arguments will allow us to better understand the specifics of Russian politics and political utilization of culture and different trajectory of the conservative turn and the very nature of the patriotic consensus that finally led to the military invasion of Ukraine. And immediate material of our course will be different layers of cultural production, from literature and cinema to historical memory, public discourse, and so on and so forth. Yeah, thank you. I will finish. Yeah. So now we have some musical block of our courses, the Artemy Troitsky's course and Nemirovsky, but we will go in the reversal perspective. So we will start from Soviet and post-Soviet rock music, and after that we will follow to Russian opera. So Artemy, please.
Yes, hello. Hello, dear comrades, and good afternoon. I believe it's already afternoon on the East Coast. So my name is Artemy Troitsky. I'm a journalist, writer, and broadcaster. Was born in Russia, but since 2014, me and my family live in Tallinn for obvious reasons. We have relocated, and by the way, I think that the students are very lucky to have the summer school in Tallinn, not some other places, because Tallinn is a little magical city, partly medieval, partly a resort with great sandy beaches, pine trees, and all those things. I mean, one of the most charming cities in Europe, in my humble opinion. So, well, my course will be far less complicated and I dare say intellectual than the ones that were described before, because it will be about rock music, you know, the dramatic and rather controversial story of rock music in the Soviet Union and contemporary Russia. I'll start in the 1950s with the Styliagi subculture. Then we'll proceed to the 60s with Beatlemania and the first Soviet cover bands. Then, of course, the 70s and the birth of Russian language rock and other national rock scenes in the former Soviet republics, followed by the 80s with Tamizdat, rock underground, all kinds of governmental repressions against rock music, which of course were followed by perestroika and glasnost, when everything underground suddenly became fully legal and commercially successful, and so on. So I think that the most interesting feature of my lectures is the fact that, well, I'm not really an academic. I've been teaching at the Faculty of Journalism of the Moscow State University for almost 15 years, but I rather consider myself a journalist and a writer. So, and I've been very actively involved in the history, which I will tell you about. I mean, I've been friends with the musicians. I've been also banned in the beginning of the 80s. So I've been in the center of this whole movement of Soviet and Russian underground rock. So a lot of things I will tell you will be like a first-hand account, you know, not just something that I've read in books. Well, I think that's about it. So you're cordially welcome.
Thank you.
I forgot to say that if you wish, of course, I can bring some recordings with me, audio and video recordings. So if we have enough time, and I hope that it will be a series of 3 lectures, then of course we will not only listen to myself, but we will also hear some Russian rock music and watch some videos.
Yes, of course, it will be amazing. Yes, please. Okay, and now we'll follow to Russian opera, to Kira Nemirovskaya's course. Please, Kira. Your mic is switched off.
How about now? Hi, everyone. It's very nice to see you all. My name is Nemirovsky. I'm an editor at Academic Studies Press, but I was trained as a musicologist and music historian, and for many years I worked as a music critic in the daily newspaper Kommersant. And opera was always a subject particularly interesting to me as a musicologist and as a music critic. So I thought that this theme would be a natural addition to our school, and the course which I propose to teach is Russian opera, cosmopolitan art in the mirror of Russian nationalism. I will describe it very briefly. It is also supposed to be a fun course, probably not as fun as rock music, but still I plan for it to be a series of quite informal meetings with a lot of videos and illustration materials and discussions of, hands-on matters, not quite purely historical and ideological, but really the reality of theater public, of perception, and fun life around opera life. Fun facts around opera life. The course will be divided into 5 classes, and the literature, if it comes to literature, on which it will be based and which I would recommend to students, is all in English, though we didn't decide yet whether the classes will be held in Russian or in English. I guess we can customize depending on what the students would prefer. Very briefly, the course is designed to present an overview of the history of opera in Russia, both of the operas written in Russia and in Russian, and the social history of the opera theater in the Russian Empire and Soviet Union. Because of the syncretic nature of opera, it was perhaps more than any other kind of art, a display of the building of nationalist idea. And because of the dependence of the opera institutions from the state, it has always been a showcase of the artists and power subjects. The 4 centuries of the history of opera follow the trajectory between elitist genre of the art, cultivated at courts, and democratic mass entertainment. Though the history of opera in Russia is about 1.5 centuries shorter, it generally follows the same narrative without twist, though. When the opera first arrived there in the middle of the 18th century, it was a wholly imported product, delivered by the guest composers, mostly from Italy, and musicians from all over Europe. The slow process of emancipation from the imperial court and its tastes led to the first attempts at creating the operas in the national language, on the national themes, and eventually to operas accessible to wider audiences. I can present, and I will probably post it on the website, the more detailed description of these 5 lectures. But in general, the first of them will be devoted to the opera of the 18th century, what we know about it, how it went from completely important product, as I said, to like mixed Russian-European product. Then the second lecture will be on the story of Pushkin's works on the opera stage, because I believe that in general, Russian opera was in a quite unhealthy, codependent relationship with national literature, and Pushkin's works showcase this better than any other thing. So this class will be concentrated on Pushkin's, on Glinka's Ruslan and Lyudmila, Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, and then Stravinsky's Mavra. The third class will focus on the historical and mythological operas of the Mighty Five, which were which gave the which really highlighted the nationalist idea on the opera stage in its best and worst, so to say. Then another class will be on opera in the Soviet time, and I think maybe of particular interest could be, because it's a lesser known material, our meeting about the post-Soviet opera, where we on the one hand briefly touch on the newest operas like The Children of Rosenthal by Leonid Desятников and the collective tetralogy called Brilliance or Sverlitze in Russian, which was written by a group of younger generation contemporary composers and staged in Moscow in 2015. And we will also look at Dmitry Chernikov's work as a stage director and stage artist. The second, the common concept for these new opera texts and the new interpretations of the old opera texts is the deconstruction of tradition and mythology of the national opera. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kira. Okay, according to our program, now we will follow to more traditional philological frames, and from social linguistics to literary history. Kapitolina, please introduce your course.
Hello, everyone. So I'm linguist and based in Tallinn, at Tallinn University. In my course, I will talk about diversity, linguistic diversity, regarding Russian literature and Russian culture in general, because, well, basically when we're talking about Russian culture, usually we mean about Russian literature, for example, usually we mean literature written in Russian. And also Russian culture quite often is like an equivalent to everything dealing with the Russian language. And also for those of, for example, some foreigners, some people from abroad, when they visit Russia, and especially Moscow and St. Petersburg, sometimes maybe if they pay attention to the so-called linguistic landscape, what's can be seen around them, this linguistic scene in all those signs and images and a visual representation of language. In most cases, especially if they move around the cities and go to more remote parts of the cities, far from the city center, from touristic places, quite often they will see that this scene is quite monolingual in Russian. There are not so many languages visible. And well, there is some English, but basically usually in the city center and in some touristic places, but it's monolingual. At the same time, if they pay attention to what's going on around them and how people actually communicate, they will hear a lot of different languages, in fact. And that's what we in our studies call monolingual facade of Russia. Because actual diversity is quite often behind this facade. And well, probably we all know this famous quotation from de Custine that Russia is a country of facades. Well, in this respect, it's also true. But in my lectures, 3 lectures, I will try to go behind this monolingual facade of Russian culture and focus on different aspects of the linguistic diversity of this culture, and also Russian history, of course. In the first lecture, we will talk mostly about Russia as a colonial empire, about how Russia expanded mostly to the east, to Siberia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, and what it meant for the country, for the people in different parts of this empire, and different policies towards those people, different definitions of those people also in those languages, and how it all developed through the 20th century, and well, what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. The second lecture will be devoted to the West Front, to what happened actually in the western provinces of Russian Empire, and how, being on the one hand colonial empire, Russia at the same time put a lot of efforts into being a national state at the same time, especially in western provinces, and its policy towards Ukraine, towards Poland, of course, also Estonia, Latvia, Finland, and to Jewish population, and so on. Well, and the third lecture will be devoted to diversity of the Russian language and also Russian literature in terms of different influences, language contexts, and also social inequality and the resulting inequality in the language used by different groups, social groups, different soslovia, different estates in the society, and how all that affected the process of communication, again, also reflected in Russian literature. And we will try to look at some of those famous masterpieces of Russian literature also as evidences of this actual diversity of the Russian culture. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Kapitolina. And now we will move to Yasha Klots course, which also will go beyond facade of Soviet official cultural production. Please, Yasha.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's actually very nice to hear how they, in a sense, do fall together into one program of lectures on very different topics. So mine has as the main subtitle the strange word that not everybody remembers or even has known, and one that is very often mixed up with a much more familiar term, Tamizdat, that's certainly much more researched and familiar, right? But Tamizdat is a very different phenomenon, and that's why I kind of almost insist on using this word in the title of my class, because it has to do with the trafficking, right, of manuscripts, mainly during the Soviet era. So this is, of course, our main focus for 5 lectures that I will be giving, which will, of course, also include kind of discussion part, and it's not going to be just straight lecturing. Yeah, so it is about the migration and, in a sense, also deterritorialization of literature of the Soviet era. I will diversify more or less familiar, I guess, much more familiar cases with so-called Russian Tamizdat, be it Varlam Shalamov or Akhmatova, such big names. Those will be placed, contextualized alongside Ukrainian literary traditions, Georgian, Lithuanian, Polish, and Czech. Of course, we will only be able to afford so much attention, right, to each of these very separate phenomena, which, however, once those manuscripts do make it across or through what used to be referred to as the Iron Curtain, enter an alternate sort of different jurisdiction, not just geography, but jurisdiction and institutions, and in a sense do form kind of an alternative canon, right? Alternative to the Soviet one, or to the Sovietized one, Poland or the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. This class will also have a hands-on sort of practical component. So students will not only have access to archival materials, this time mostly digitized, and will get some experience in working with primary, most often not yet still unpublished texts, whether it's just a transcription or a translation or annotation or commenting, like providing glossaries for certain abbreviations that editors would be using in private or editorial correspondence. So it is, in a sense, also about publishing. Publishing, of course, means making public. So it's not only about making public those manuscripts that had been deemed illegal and sort of denied official circulation, and only in a different jurisdiction would they become official, right? So it's very much about crossing that border between official and unofficial. Essentially, the whole course is about this border, about how it's being crossed, through what agents of cultural production it was done. But it's also about publishing or publicizing the legacy, right, of this enormous branch, let's say, or part or chapter of Russian, East European, and Eurasian literatures of the Soviet era. So we will be working on something that I hope kind of makes a difference still. It's still very much under-researched. And lastly, given the contemporary sort of literary, cultural, political, geographical, geopolitical situation, of course, the course would not be let's say, complete or even relevant, perhaps, today if we don't at least attempt to touch on what's happening today, given the internet, and yet giving those reenactments, right, of the Cold War era, of which Tamizdat of the Soviet period was essentially a product. So we will talk and perhaps do interviews, maybe, or at least use them with today's publishers of Russian Russophone, let's say, texts abroad, be it Medusa or be it Babel Books in Tel Aviv, or a few other publishing initiatives that have emerged in the past couple of years or so, or earlier. So yes, and the final thing is the course is based not just on my kind of own research. Yes, this is what I do, but it's also an extension of a bigger project, which is very much student-run and has had over 100 volunteers over the years. And of course, anyone who is interested would be able to continue being part of the Tamizdat project and kind of taking as much as you can from participating in such an initiative. So thank you, everybody, again, for putting this together, and can't wait.
Thank you, Yasha. Thank you so much. And now we will switch from verbal to visual dimension of culture, of Russian culture, and I invite Ksenia Remezova to introduce your course.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm art historian, art curator, and avant-garde researcher, and I'm very thankful to Igor and Ilya to invite me to this summer school. I would say that my course is probably maybe a bit different from others. We will speak about the first third of 20th century, focusing on the Russian avant-garde, but as I suppose many of you know, today the term Russian avant-garde become a trigger for art historians and art curator, and become the term which is reviewed. And of course, focusing on this particular topic as female face of the Russian avant-garde, we will focus firstly, and the first lecture will be about Russian avant-garde itself. In a chronological art historical perspective, we will see why this term, what does it mean, this term Russian avant-garde, why we could use it anyway now, or which points we need to review in a critical way. And we will focus on very different approaches from Soviet art historian and European art historian who for the very first time involved this term in the art history of the modernism in 50s. And then, of course, focusing on the female faces of the avant-garde, we will approach the sexual gender studies and this feminist studies that raised in 70s. But anyway, I will invite you also to think in this critical, because I would suggest that we discuss it in a way what we add in this topic as female art, and what we actually reduce when we try to speak about it in such kind of gender differences, speaking about Russian Amazons of the avant-garde, because they themselves don't make them as a group. And so I think that it's very interesting that we will speak about them as a gender community while they didn't make it themselves. And of course, speaking about female art of the avant-garde, I would say that that's not enough to speak only about the paintings and graphic, because talking about input of artists, in particular female artists in Russian avant-garde, we need also to take into account their texts, because in art historian there's very reviewed the text of Malevich, Kandinsky, Larionov, but actually the female artists, they leave so many texts which we also need to take into account if we want to be in a wide context of modernism and Russian modernism itself. And of course, we also will speak about their input in different artistic pedagogical system, because female artists in the Soviet periods like 20s and 30s will be very powerful, making new approaches to the art education, as well as the museum, let's say, museum studies and museum completation in the era of creating the museum of the new art in 20s and 30s. And the female artists actually will make such a big input in this. So the contemporary museums still have the collection formed in those era by female artists. And of course, we will speak also about contemporary art exhibition and contemporary research is focusing on female artists, because it is very interesting to understand how especially not very well-known artists, female artists, affect on the modernism, which is studies focusing on well-known people, and what we can add if we look at maybe some peripheral figures of the avant-garde as well. And of course, in the end of the course and during the course, I will prepare the list of kind of, let's say, must-read books about Russian avant-garde, which you can reach in English and in Russian if you would like to. And we will also make a virtual tour to some museums, and I will prepare the list where you can find actually those artists about whom we will talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia. And we have 2 courses more in our program, Grigori Utgof and Igor Nemirovsky. Grisha, please, your turn and your floor.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you, Igor. Hello to everybody. Well, actually, I will be very, very brief because, well, I think that I'm the only Russian-speaking Estonian here, so basically you can skip my course at any time at no offense. So my course, what I have in my mind, so I'm a literary historian, so what I can offer is a slimmed-down version of what I've been doing at Tallinn University for the past 15 years. So basically, if I need to give 5 lectures, that will be 5 lectures about verbs of motion in Russian literary texts. So I will probably start with Tolstoy, with Sevastopol sketches or Sevastopol stories, if you will, from Sevastopol in December let's practice some imperative. Then I will move to Garshin 4 days, then to Chekhov's Lady with Lapdog, or Lady with the Dog, yeah, depending on the translation. So we shall get from war to peace, and we shall continue that peace theme with 2 more love stories from the 20th century. So definitely I will talk about Bunin, the Caucasus, or days in the Caucasus. And while being at Nabokov School, I cannot skip Nabokov. So the last meeting will be entirely devoted to Springenfeld by Vladimir Nabokov. At the same time, due to the very complexity of the last 3 texts, Chekhov is more complex than Garshin, yeah, and Bunin is far more complex, just linguistically, just grammatically, than, say, Tolstoy. So basically, all depends on the number of students and on the level of students coming to Tallinn. If they are students with 2nd year Russian, so maybe Springenfeld is not for them. Yeah, maybe I need to teach that not as something complementing, Olga's course and other Russian language teachers' course, but as something that I can teach in translation. But again, this is just a couple of ideas. So I won't be teaching Babel because after seeing Igor's syllabus, I decided, okay, well, I can, I wish I could, yeah, but I can always restructure that, and I do not want to teach something that other instructors offer. So, but again, so this can be 5 lectures, this can be 2 lectures, this can be 3 lectures, and first we need to have a more or less clear idea of how many students do we have, how many teachers do we need. So I live just 6 miles from the campus, so I can either be there or not be there. I'm available, so I'm in Tallinn in June and July. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Grisha. And okay, now we will go to the last course of our program. Igor, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So my course is entitled and dedicated the Greek charm of violence in Russian literature. And it is mostly on the history of how the idea of violence appeared and, so to speak, stuck in modern Russian literature. We will investigate the key stages through which the idea developed from Pushkin to contemporary literature. It is impossible to confine this inquiry to the purely literary dimension, so we will also be venturing into adjacent fields such as history and philosophy, while centering nevertheless the formal means from which the idea of violence manifests in literature. That is the particular aesthetics it produces. The violence theme appeared in Russian literature as an extension of the idea of manifesting the historical determinism inherent to revolution. Paradoxically, the idea of violence found itself associated with the literary practices of movements conceived of as avant-garde or at least innovative among contemporaries. In the archaist innovator position, typically the idea of violence corresponded more to the later. This can readily be seen in the early romantic work of Pushkin, in which the idea of revolutionary violence finds its most explicit expression in the era. Equally paradoxal is the combination of the idea of violence with the idea of compassion, as was the case with Radishev's work. Finally, both in Pushkin's writing and those of contemporaries, violence was associated with Napoleonism. Still, the Napoleonic theme was often considered as a case of the resistance of the part of the individual to fate, that is, to historical determinism. Pushkin's work is an exemplary illustration of how the idea of violence was overcome, how the idea as it developed lost its discreet charm. The work of Alexander Bloc provided a different example, expressing the idea of the path, идею пути, in his work, which is initially be understood as the idea of the free will imperative to serving the beautiful lady, прекрасная дама. Bloc eventually arrived to the idea of the terrible world, and of such a world's righteous destruction, in which free will plays no role. Bloc would aesthetically think of this world destruction in the 12th, which was received by contemporaries as a hymn to revolutionary violence. Pushkin and Bloc represent two opposite dispositions toward the idea of violence in Russian literature, as well as two different paths in the consideration of this idea. For Dostoevsky, like Pushkin, the sharp of violence fade away with time, though nevertheless Kirillov in Demons and Ivan Karamazov simultaneously rejected the idea of violence and the idea of new social orders founded on deterministic ideas. Thus, for Kirillov, the only possible form of rejecting violence is voluntary suicide. Moreover, Dostoevsky had intended to examine the idea of violence, of revolutionary violence, in a planned but ultimately unwritten novel about the Paris Commune, which was written or starting to be written simultaneously with the beginning of his work on demons. A portion of the course will be specifically dedicated to the Russian literary appreciation of the Holocaust as a total expression of violence in the 20th century. Unfortunately, there are not many works dedicated to the Holocaust to Russian literature. There is, however, the important case of Vasily Grossman's life and fate, which not only describes the Holocaust, but also considers the Holocaust in light of the anti-Semitic waves that took place in the Soviet Union after the war. In this case, an appreciation of Holocaust and its violence receives a kind of typological consideration as universally maximal manifestation of violence. And finally, there will be a separate lecture dedicated to the idea of violence in contemporary Russian literature, illustrated by the examples of so-called new drama, новая drama. The brightest example is Ivan Voropayev drama July, which Mark Lipovetsky defined as a performance of violence. So my course will consist from 5 lectures, and in short, the first is on Pushkin, Bloc and Babel. The second one on violence as expression of the human will and the idea of Napoleonism, and in the center of consideration will be the question why Nietzsche is so beloved in Russia. The third lecture will be on resistance to violence as a form of rejection, the order of the world, suicide, and as its foundation. The special consideration will be on Tolstoy, non-resistance to evil by violence. So the first lecture will be on Holocaust, and the last, the fifth one, will be on contemporary Russian literature on the stage as современная drama. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you for all who introduced their courses. So, as well as we can see, we already have a very intensive, rich, and I would say excellent summer school program. And maybe, but it's a matter of little things. It's the response interest from our prospective audience. Yeah, I would say reciprocal enthusiasm of prospective students who should apply in order to participate the summer school, and will take us an opportunity to meet each other in Tallinn and to realize this program in practice, to teach all these courses. So so I hope that we will have such an interest from students. Yeah. Okay. If somebody has some questions or comments, suggestions.
Thank you, Ilya. Thank you very much. We have one suggestion from Olga Roginskaya. She's suggesting to arrange events, right? If I understand you correctly, to focus on, to make events, combining the opera performance with some commentaries, some introductory lectures to Russian avant-garde or other important cultural events. I think that probably before we will start, we will have some interesting not only for us, but also for our potential students, which could probably make us closer to them, to the audience. Maybe it will attract more potential students. For now, I believe that we reached we got acquaintance, right? We all did our introductions. Thank you so much for this. And I think that I want to thank you and, say you до новых радостных встреч. Спасибо большое всем. Всем, кто пришел, и всем, кто рассказал. До свидания.
Всего доброго.
Всего доброго. До свидания.